The Sphinx's secret chamber. Why Egypt's government forbids scanning the Hall of Records. The drill bit whined for 3 seconds, then stopped. On the monitor, dust cleared to reveal another wall. In the Valley of the Kings, the room everyone hoped for, Nefertiti's, just vanished into static. A minister stared, cameras rolling, while a radar specialist shook his head. They couldn't agree on what the data meant, but one thing was clear. The tomb of Tutankhamun had started a war. And the fallout would ricochet all the way to the Sphinx, where another mystery waited under stone older than history. The idea that wouldn't die. The rumor started long before any scanner hummed to life. Across decades, the same whisper threaded through guidebooks, late-night radio, and conference halls. There's something sealed where it shouldn't be, and someone powerful won't let us see it. Get this, Egypt has never lacked mysteries. But when technology caught up to the legends, the friction got real. Ground-penetrating radar promised to find voids without lifting a single block. Microrobots could snake through shafts no human could enter. Muons could map hidden spaces with cosmic particles. Each breakthrough raised a question that made officials nervous. What happens if the instruments say there's a chamber we can't explain? Meanwhile, something else was happening. The world kept chasing one queen, Nefertiti. Her face was already an icon, her burial a missing chapter. If you were going to launch a global story about a hidden room, tying it to her would light the fuse. That's exactly what happened in 2015, when an Egyptologist named Nicholas Reeves looked at high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's tomb and thought he saw doors. Doors plastered over, painted to disappear. The proposal was as elegant as it was explosive. Tut's burial chamber was a corridor masquerading as a room, an outer annex to a deeper, older suite possibly built for Nefertiti. If Reeves was right, then the walls of KV 62 weren't just walls. They were a stage prop. But there was one problem. Non-invasive tech in ancient limestone is a minefield. GPR can flag moisture, fissures, and ancient plaster as signs of a void. Egypt's geology swallows signals and throws back ghosts. And once politicians and tourists enter the frame, every blip becomes a headline. To understand why the Sphinx still can't be scanned freely for a rumored Hall of Records, we need to sit inside that tomb in the Valley of the Kings and watch how a single interpretation of a single wall turned into a global standoff. Because what happened there became the template for what's allowed, and what isn't, on the Giza Plateau. The story begins with a theory, a minister eager for a discovery, a radar expert who saw treasure in the noise, and a room that refused to materialize. Tutankhamun's walls start a war, KV 62. In August heat, Nicholas Reeves stepped into the tomb everyone knows, looking for what no one expected. He wasn't chasing gold. He was reading walls. In high-resolution scans, he'd found lines where there shouldn't be lines, faint rectilinear ghosts beneath painted scenes. To him, they were sealed doorways. He said the burial chamber was really a passage, with a hidden suite beyond the north wall, the most likely place for Nefertiti's burial. Stakes? Massive. The discovery would rewrite the 18th dynasty. It would hand Egypt the biggest archaeological announcement in a century. It would also force authorities to approve invasive work in the most fragile, visited tomb on Earth. What nobody knew at the time, the radar battle that followed would set the tone for every future scan request at Giza. Hirokatsu Watanabe rolled his radar cart in November 2015. His kit was customized, his experience broad, and the mood electric. The Minister of Antiquities at the time, Mamdouh El-Damity, stood nearby. Journalists pressed close. Watanabe pushed along the north and west walls, watching the screen. He said he saw it, clear reflections indicating a void, even materials with different signatures, metallic, organic. El-Damity stepped to the microphones and told the world, in measured words, that evidence pointed to hidden spaces. Here's where it gets tricky. GPR is powerful, but it can't tell you metal from wood with certainty in that environment. The valley's limestone is crisscrossed by ancient fractures that bounce radar like mirrors. Some signals travel through plaster differently than rock. And the inside of the painted walls had hidden repairs that could look like geometry. While that was happening in Luxor, radar specialists abroad started asking for raw data. They wanted to see the profiles, the settings, the antenna frequencies. It wasn't petty. Without it, there's no peer review, and without peer review, there's no science. 3 months later, an American team ran scans. Their conclusion wasn't a headline. They couldn't confirm a room, and they couldn't rule one out. The signal was messy. Egypt's ministry held the line, more testing. Meanwhile, Francesco Porcelli's group from the Polytechnic University of Turin prepared a different approach. 3 radar systems, multiple frequencies from 150 MHz up to 3000 MHz, dense grids, tighter controls. They didn't come to chase a queen, they came to beat the geology. Their survey in 2018 took longer, felt colder, and avoided cameras. When their analysis landed, the room went quiet. No clear evidence of voids. No chambers behind the north wall. If anything was there, radar wasn't seeing it. This was the moment everything changed. Officially, the ministry accepted the Turin results. Reeves's elegant theory was declared and proven. Publicly, it sounded like closure. Internally, it triggered something else. Caution hardened into policy. If a single claim could whip up global expectation that fast, Egypt needed stronger control over who scanned, how they scanned, and what they announced. In the aftermath, Reeves didn't recant. Eldamity didn't either. He later supported new GPR work suggesting a corridor-like feature north of the tomb. Not behind the painted walls, but nearby. A British firm, TerraVision Exploration, found an anomaly outside the chamber alignment. Interesting, but not the door everyone wanted. Zahi Hawass, never far from a microphone, dismissed the tech's reliability in those conditions. He'd say GPR lies, geology lies, and headlines never read the methods. Back in the tomb, conservators kept doing quiet work while the theory roamed worldwide. Tourists still lined up to see the boy king's gold mask in Cairo, then shuffled through the tomb in Luxor, unaware that a small war had been fought over what lay behind the paint. Here's the human moment. In a Cairo hotel breakfast room, a young radar analyst from the Turin project refreshed his email and saw the ministry's statement go live. He didn't cheer. He worried. He knew the data didn't prove there was nothing. It only showed that their instruments hadn't seen something. That's different. And yet, policy would likely treat it as a full stop. Across town, a producer crossed out "Discovery Imminent" on a whiteboard and wrote "No Chamber." The segment lost its arc. The ratings lost their tease. Meanwhile, on a flight home, Reeves scribbled next to a printout of the north wall's murals, just in pencil. Absurd not to test with endoscopic drill? He'd never get the permit. So why does the KV-62 radar war matter for the Sphinx? Because after 2018, Egypt's message was simple. Non-invasive tech would be used, but on Egypt's terms. Data would funnel through official channels. Announcements would be paced. And if high-profile radar stories could burn the ministry before, they wouldn't again. This decision would haunt them because it tightened a gate, just as new tools, Muon imaging, improved GPR, fiber optic robotics, were getting good enough to ask dangerous questions at Giza. 3 days earlier in this story, really decades, another team had drilled a tiny hole through a mysterious block in the Great Pyramid and found another block. That's coming. But first, one last twist in KV-62. In 2020, Eldamity resurfaced with a claim. A hidden room roughly 7 feet high, 30 feet long, indicated by fresh scans. Praise and pushback arrived on schedule. Hawass lit into the methodology. Scientists asked for raw datasets. The ministry kept the lid on until it could decide the narrative. By then, the public had settled into a pattern. Hope, scan, press conference, contradiction, silence. The cycle wore down trust. For officials, that was the lesson. Don't let the instruments drive the story. Control the pace, control the access, control the fallout. Which brings us back to the Sphinx. If there's even a chance of a void under that limestone giant, you can see why a government would hesitate. The KV-62 saga taught them that a shadow on a radargram can spiral into a political storm. And yet, the idea wouldn't die. The Hall of Records, legendary, ridiculous to some, irresistible to others, would require the same tools and the same permits. After what happened in Tut's tomb, those permits would be harder than ever to get. Gatekeepers at Giza, permits, power, preservation. While that debate simmered in Luxor, the real power sat 300 miles north on a low ridge of wind and tourists, Giza. Here, access isn't a right, it's negotiated breath by breath. The Supreme Council of Antiquities holds the keys, and for years one voice shaped how often those keys turned. Zahi Hawass didn't invent gatekeeping, but he perfected it. From his office, permits were more than paper. They were levers of preservation, prestige, and politics. Stakes in this moment were human and national. On one side, researchers with instruments that could see through stone without touching it. On the other, guardians responsible for the most visited heritage site in Africa, terrified of a hairline crack turning into a headline catastrophe. If a scanner report triggered excavation, pressure, if a leak sparked looters or copycat digs, the blame would land on the gate. So the gate stayed narrow. Action began in quiet rooms. Proposals arrived full of acronyms, GPR, ERT, muons, promising clarity. Officials read them and saw risk. They remembered Tut's radar storm and the way a minister's quote got boiled down to secret room found. The lesson hardened. Insist on Egyptian partners, control data release, deny invasive follow-ups until results are bulletproof. Researchers bristled, but the policy had its own logic. The Sphinx isn't an experiment. It's a patient in intensive care. Every test carries side effects. Meanwhile, something else was happening across the plateau. A different technology slipped through the gate because it promised patience, Muon tomography. Cosmic particles aren't glamorous, but they don't drill, don't vibrate, don't scratch a single grain of limestone. Partnered with universities, the Scan Pyramids team mapped voids inside the Great Pyramid. One massive, one near a chevron-lined entrance passage. The images were careful, the language cautious. No prophecies, no Nefertiti. Still, announcements drew global attention. And inside the SCA, they drew a line. This is how we share. Slowly, with consensus. Unknown to many applicants, the permit process had a memory. Gantenbrink's 1993 robot had outrun official messaging and made a door famous before Egypt could script the reveal. It wasn't forgotten. Later, iRobot's Pyramid Rover and the Djedi project moved under tighter supervision. Tiny drill, micro snake camera, a look, then a stop. The second blocking stone remained unbreached, and public patience frayed. Was it caution or choreography? Depends on who you ask. For gatekeepers, it was proof that restraint works. For independent teams, it felt like a ceiling. Here's a micro-story. A junior curator at Giza opened an email. A European lab offered a weekend survey of the Sphinx enclosure using a backpack GPR. No cables. 2 hours tops. She drafted a polite no. Her supervisor replaced it with 3 sentences about long-term conservation plans, current studies, and future consideration. She hit send, closed her laptop, and stepped outside into a gust of desert grit. She loved that statue like a person. She didn't want its chest pocked by someone's pilot study. But there was one problem. The Hall of Records rumor wasn't a pilot study. It was a cultural grenade pulled back in the 1920s with a series of trance readings, then rolled forward by decades of TV specials. If any dataset hinted at a void beneath the Sphinx, seismic, radar, resistivity, it could hijack the national conversation. Even negative results became fuel. They won't let us test, some would say, because they know. Authorities, burned by KV-62's loop of hype and backlash, had little appetite for another cycle. Action turned procedural. Applications asked, what frequencies? What grid density? Who owns raw data? Where will it be stored? Who speaks at the press conference? Teams with patience got traction. Others hit a wall. When officials allowed limited surveys near the Sphinx in past decades, results were mixed, ambiguous, or unpublished. The geology was noisy, interpretations diverged. Skeptics saw natural fissures. Believers saw corridors. The ministry saw a trap. Impact rippled beyond labs. Tourism budgets depend on stability. One rogue claim about underground city networks can skew a season. In 2025, when an Italian group waved remote sensing images and big words without permits, Hawass called it fake news before breakfast. It wasn't just ego, it was guard duty. Control the narrative to protect the site, the staff, the income, the pride. Meanwhile, the KV-62 precedent hung over everything. If 3 rounds of radar could contradict each other in a small painted room, what chaos might unfold under a 50-meter-long line? The response wasn't to ban technology. It was to throttle it. Muons? Yes, within frameworks. Robots? Maybe with Egyptian hands on the joystick. GPR on the Sphinx's chest? Not without a consensus plan, peer-reviewed methods, and a communication strategy. This was the moment everything changed for researchers with bold proposals. The scientific bar didn't just rise, it moved behind glass. Preservation spoke louder than curiosity. And in that new quiet, the Hall of Records slipped back to a whisper, still audible, still tempting, but fenced by policy that learned, painfully, from a painted wall in a boy king's tomb. Robots meet doors, Gantenbrink to Djedi. 3 days earlier in our story, really 1993, a small tracked robot named Up You Out two-nosed into a shaft barely wider than a shoebox inside the Great Pyramid. Rudolf Gantenbrink, a German engineer with a talent for tight spaces, watched its camera feed climb the southern air shaft from the Queen's chamber, meter by meter, into darkness that no human could reach. The stakes were simple and enormous. If the shaft ended open to the outside, it was ventilation. If it ended in something else, the pyramid's internal logic wasn't what everyone thought. Action came at 60 meters. On the monitor, a pale limestone plate filled the frame, carefully fitted, polished, with two copper fittings peeking out like handles. A door that wasn't a door, in a passage that wasn't supposed to have doors. Gantenbrink backed the robot down, the world rushed in, and the shaft's endpoint got a name: the door. Media called it mysterious. Engineers called it unprecedented. Officials called for patience. Impact was immediate and messy. Egypt loved attention, but it also loved control. The narrative slipped before the SCA could script it. Access tightened. Gantenbrink left, frustrated. The door stayed shut. And yet the image of those copper pins burned into public memory, a promise of secrets that Egypt's guardians weren't ready to unwrap. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Robotics got better. In 2002, an American-built platform, Pyramid Rover, returned to that same slab. This time, a drill bit the size of a pencil pierced the limestone, a 1.9 centimeter hole bored with surgical care. On the other side, a small void, then another blocking stone just beyond. Not open air, not a corridor, a sealed space leading to another seal. The feed showed a smooth backside on the first block, polished as if meant to be seen by no one. The action ended not with a chamber, but with a second barrier only centimeters away. The impact was paradox. The mystery deepened and flattened at once. We learned the first stone wasn't a crude plug, it was finished like an interior surface. We learned the shaft wasn't a simple duct, it had architectural intention. But the payoff, if there was one, moved one step farther out of reach. Authorities had a defensible line. More drilling risks damage with uncertain gain. The world had a new loop: discovery, reveal, restraint. Unknown to most viewers, across the pyramid, a northern shaft held its own blocker. Engineers worried about getting stuck. The robot backed off. Another open loop. Then 2011 brought Djedi, a slimmer, smarter machine with inchworm locomotion and a micro-snake camera that could bend where tracks couldn't. The stakes felt renewed. If the snake could slip through the small hole from 2002, maybe we'd finally see what the second stone hid. Action was precise. The camera slid past copper fittings, panned across the back of the first slab, and found red markings, hieroglyphic-style signs, on a surface nobody had seen since the 26th century BCE. It revealed the copper handles were looped and secured at the back. It surveyed tool marks and the careful finish of the stone. It stopped short of drilling the second barrier. The team didn't know its thickness, and the permit didn't promise another hole. Impact traveled in whispers. Engineers marveled at the craft. Egyptologists argued about whether the red signs were mason marks or alignment codes. Conservationists exhaled, no new holes. For the public, the cliffhanger lengthened. The door behind the door stayed closed. The pyramid had spoken, but only in syllables. Here's where it folds back to policy. After Gantenbrink's door went viral, Egypt learned to pace access. After Pyramid Rover, it learned to limit damage. After Djedi, it learned to bank goodwill by revealing details without breaking seals. This wasn't random. It was a template. Non-invasive first, micro-invasive second, stop at ambiguity. Share enough to prove progress, not enough to trigger a frenzy. Now lay that template over the Sphinx. A rumored void beneath its paws, a hall whispered into existence by 20th century psychics and late-night TV, and a global audience hungry for a reveal. Replace tight shafts with bedrock under a monument that has cracked and crumbled for centuries. Replace copper pins with seismic anomalies that might be fissures, might be cuttings, might be nothing. The human equation is the same. Engineers who can reach, officials who must protect, and a narrative that can outrun both. Get this, robots meeting doors taught Egypt how to say not yet, with data in hand. And if a camera could find glyphs nobody expected inside a shaft, imagine what a scanner might stir under the Sphinx. That's exactly why the gate stayed narrow, and why every request to probe the limestone there would be judged against a memory of copper pins and a polished stone that looked like a secret, and remained one. What science can and can't see under the Sphinx? To understand why the Sphinx's underworld remains rumor, we need to talk about tools. and their blind spots. Non-invasive tech sounds decisive. In practice, limestone is a trickster. It's layered, salted, fractured, patched with ancient repairs, and soaked by rising groundwater over centuries. Instruments don't see chambers, they see contrasts. And contrasts can mean a lot of different things. Start with ground-penetrating radar. In clean, uniform soils, GPR is a scalpel. On the Giza Plateau, it's more like an ultrasound through scar tissue. Radar waves bounce off boundaries, rock to void, dry to wet, limestone to plaster. The return can look crisp, but that doesn't tell you what the boundary is. We learned this the hard way in KB62. Early scans seem to show voids, even metallic and organic signals, claims radar can't reliably make in that geology. Later, a multi-frequency survey found nothing conclusive behind the painted walls. Same tomb, same goal. Different setups, different answers. Now place that uncertainty under a monument that's been battered by wind, repaired in multiple eras, and sits above a fluctuating aquifer. A noisy medium multiplies ghosts. Seismic surveys promise clarity. Hit the ground, listen for echoes. But under the Sphinx, vibration itself becomes a conservation risk. Even small sources travel through joints and restorations. And the bedrock beneath the enclosure is cut by natural fissures that can mimic right angles in processed data. Engineers can filter, but filters add interpretation. Interpretation adds doubt. A line on a printout can be a crack, a tool-cut trench, a backfilled restoration, or a void. Without a borehole to ground truth, you're reading tea leaves in bedrock. Electrical resistivity sounds elegant. Push a current into the ground, map resistance, find anomalies. Salt ruins the party. The Sphinx's limestone has suffered haloclasty. Salts drawn up by moisture, crystals growing and bursting stone from within. That same salt creates conductive pathways that blur low resistivity zones. A pocket of damp sand can masquerade as a cavity. A block of old restoration mortar can pretend to be solid rock. The map looks beautiful. The meaning is slippery. Then there's Muon imaging. It made headlines in the Great Pyramid because muons drift down from space whether we're ready or not. Put detectors in the right place, wait, and dense stone shades the muon rain while voids let more through. It's passive, gentle, patient. It also needs clean geometry and space for detectors. Inside the Sphinx, there's no room in the body, and outside placements would need months, maybe years, to build a signal strong enough to argue for a small cavity. Even then, the method's resolution at shallow depths in complicated ground isn't magic. The big void above the Grand Gallery showed what muons can do in a giant block of masonry. The Sphinx sits on variable bedrock, cut by an open enclosure, patched and repatched. The signal would smear. Meanwhile, something else was happening around the Sphinx, weather and history. The enclosure walls show vertical scalloping that some read as rainfall erosion. Others point to salt, runoff, quarrying scars, and poor quality member 2 limestone. If you can't get consensus on what the stone surface endured, agreeing on what lies beneath it is tougher. Every hypothesis about age or process nudges how people read geophysics. If you suspect ancient floods carved those grooves, a void-like blip feels like architecture. If you see haloclasty and repair, the same blip feels like geology. Here's a micro-story. In a cramped lab, a geophysicist overlays old restoration maps on a fresh resistivity slice from the Sphinx's forepaws. 2 anomalies line up with known backfill trenches from early 20th century works. A third sits between them, skewed. She circles it, writes unknown, then closes the file. Without a core or an endoscope, unknown is the honest word. It's also the least viral. What nobody outside the permit room sees is the arithmetic of risk. One sensational claim can derail months of conservation. One misread anomaly can trigger calls for drilling a statue that's already survived erosion, salt, and misguided repairs. After KV-62's radar whiplash, officials want redundancies, multiple methods, independent teams, strict data custody, peer review before microphones. That takes time. It also takes trust between scientists who disagree and between those scientists and a government judged on every headline. So yes, science can scan the Sphinx. It can propose, model, and narrow possibilities. What it can't do without a final, invasive step is deliver certainty on demand. And certainty is the one thing the Hall of Records demands. That's the trap. The more incredible the claim, the more invasive the proof must be. The Sphinx's guardians have chosen restraint. The technology advances. The rumor waits. The water erosion fight, conventional versus fringe. To understand why a rumored chamber beneath the Sphinx keeps colliding with policy, you have to step up to the enclosure walls and read the scars. The grooves aren't tidy. They run vertical, undulating, like water once traced fingers down soft stone. For some, that's the smoking gun. For others, it's a trick of bad limestone, salt, and time. The stakes here are brutal. If those vertical profiles came from heavy rainfall, the Sphinx could predate the Old Kingdom by millennia, shoving history's timeline out of joint and inviting 100 new questions about who built what, when, and why. If they didn't, then the statue sits firmly in Khafre's reign, a 4th dynasty project carved from bedrock and repaired ever since. The Hall of Records lives or dies on which world you accept. Action starts in the late 20th century, when a writer named John Anthony West revives an older idea. The Sphinx shows water erosion from an age of rains, long before dynastic Egypt. He enlists a geologist, Robert Schoch, to walk the enclosure in 1990 and ask a simple question: what made these forms? Schoch sees the vertical scalloping and argues for rainfall, prolonged and extensive, ending well before 2500 BCE. He doesn't say Atlantis, but critics hear the echo. He pushes a minimum date back to 5000 BCE, then later to around the end of the last ice age. Each step turns a geological observation into a cultural earthquake. Meanwhile, something else is happening on that same rock face. Egyptologists and conservation scientists map layers, restorations, and material behavior. Mark Lehner points to sequence: the Sphinx, its temple, Khafre's Valley complex, architecture tied like gears. He notes unfinished work in the enclosure, the way the Sphinx temple sits upon the earlier wall of the Valley Temple. He brings in luminescence dates that land in the 3rd millennium BCE. Zahi Hawass, never shy, calls the limestone poor in places, and the weathering explainable by salt and wind working on stone that was often buried and unburied across centuries. The Djedi team, invited to study conservation in the early 199s, highlights haloclasty, salts wicking up through capillary action, crystallizing, popping surface layers like blisters. That mechanism alone can carve havoc. Impact spreads through journals and TV. Schoch emphasizes that wind makes horizontal bands. These are vertical. Lehner counters that quarrying scars and runoff can produce similar patterns, especially where joints pre-exist in the bedrock. Geoscientist Jorn Christensen adds that some erosion could predate carving, water moving through ancient fractures before the statue existed, making the walls look older without pushing the sculpture's birth back in time. The debate gets technical fast, but the effect is simple. Uncertainty becomes policy fuel. If experts can't agree on weathering in plain sight, what happens when someone waves a noisy radar scan from under the paws? Here's a microstory. Under a harsh noon, a field geologist sets a hand lens on a ledge in the enclosure and traces a finger along a softened channel. He glances at a nearby restoration block from the 192s, mortar line, different texture, different decay rate. He jots member 2 variability high, solution features follow joints. Later, back at his desk, he reads Schoch's older graphs, then a newer climate study noting heavy rainfalls into the end of the Old Kingdom around 220 BCE. He writes one word in the margin: overlap. While that was happening, another voice tried to reconcile pieces. Some argued for a combined model: episodic rainfall, runoff concentrating in catchments, salt cycling under sand burial, and human quarrying shaping what we see now. None of that sounds like TV. All of it complicates a simple tale of rain equals prehistory. And yet the fringe frame sticks because it's clean. A pre-dynastic Sphinx hints at a lost chapter. Lost chapters sell. Officials don't adjudicate sedimentology in press conferences, they manage risk. After KV-62's radar saga, the ministry's appetite for testing ideas fueled by media thinned. A scan at the Sphinx that lights up an anomaly will be read through whatever story people already prefer. If you expect rain-carved antiquity, you'll see architecture. If you expect haloclasty, you'll see geology. Either way, pressure mounts to drill. What nobody knew at the time the modern erosion fight reignited was how deeply it would intertwine with permits. Each time Schoch extended his date range, the Hall of Records got an implied promotion. Older statue, older myths, deeper secrets. Each time Lehner pointed to construction sequence and dynastic context, the hall shrank back into rumor. Gatekeepers watched both and asked the only question that matters on site: Will any test we allow resolve this, or just inflame it? In the aftermath, the Sphinx's body kept crumbling at the edges, restorers kept patching, and the enclosure kept whispering different stories to different listeners. Scientists measured, argued, and published. Tourists snapped photos with the head against a blue sky. The rumor waited below, patient as stone. The Hall of Records, claim versus policy. To understand the standoff, you have to separate two things that keep getting braided together: a claim born from prophecy and a policy born from experience. The Hall of Records didn't start in a lab. It started in the 192s with trance readings that described a chamber of knowledge buried near the Sphinx's paws. Decades later, TV turned it into a quest. And somewhere along the way, a question with no data became a magnet for any anomaly found within shouting distance of the statue. Stakes are obvious and messy. If a real void sits under the Sphinx, the discovery would pull global attention to Giza for years. If it aligns with a record's narrative, it would hijack Egyptology with a story scientists can't test without invasive work. Government officials have to make a hard calculation. What if the most efficient way to kill a rumor is the one thing they can't risk? Drilling into a monument already bruised by time, salt, and repairs? Action tends to look procedural, but the pressure is human. Researchers approach with proposals: seismic arrays around the enclosure, high-frequency GPR transects across the forepaws, resistivity grids tied to older restoration maps. On paper, the pathway is clean, non-invasive first, correlation among independent teams second, only then any micro-invasive verification. In practice, the Hall of Records claim distorts the field. One leak, one loose quote, and a careful pilot study gets recast as Egypt admits hidden chamber. That headline lives forever. The site does not. Meanwhile, something else is happening behind closed doors. The KV-62 radar saga is pinned to the bulletin board like a cautionary poster. Officials remember how contrasting GPR surveys in the same tomb produced opposite narratives and a global backlash. They remember the way a minister's hopeful phrasing outran the data, and how long it took to put the story back in the box. Now transpose that to the Sphinx, more fragile, more visible, more symbolic. The permit gate doesn't just narrow, it adds locks. Proponents try to launder the legend through science. They say, forget the prophecy, look at the instruments. Cite older seismic hints. Point to resistivity anomalies. Ask for a carefully placed bore under modern paving, nowhere near original stone, with fiber optic visualization. The response is consistent. Bring redundancy, bring independent replication, bring peer-reviewed plans that anticipate false positives from fissures, salinization, masonry voids, and early 20th century backfill. And bring a communication strategy that won't light a fuse. Here's a micro-story. A senior official in Cairo pulls a thin folder labeled Sphinx, Subsurface Requests. Inside are 5 proposals and 3 clippings with splashy graphics of tunnels. He sets them aside and opens a memo from conservation engineers describing salt cycling in the enclosure and hairline failures in recent repairs. He underlines one line: vibration-sensitive zones, no impact sources. Then he writes in the margin, no seismic with active shots, and closes the file. Impact radiates in 2 directions. In the scientific community, the bar looks impossibly high, especially to teams without deep local partnerships. Some say the policy is a cover-up. Others, who've watched stone spall like pastry under a fingertip, call it stewardship. In the public arena, the vacuum fills itself. They won't test because they're hiding something competes with there's nothing there, and they know it. The truth is duller and harder. There might be something, there might not, and proving either is hazardous. What nobody knew at the time the modern claim reignited was how much the KV-62 precedent would dictate tone. The ministry learned that controlling data flow doesn't just protect reputations, it protects monuments from being used as props. After Gantenbrink's door and the radar whiplash in Tut's tomb, the script became policy. Non-invasive first, conservative interpretation, no invasive step without overwhelming justification, and no press until results are vetted. So the Hall of Records remains exactly where it began. In a story people tell about a place that can't afford another experiment that becomes a narrative. The instruments get better. The permit language gets tighter. The Sphinx waits. And in the silence between claim and proof, policy does the only thing it can live with: it buys time. How the KV-62 controversy rewrote scanning rules. While proposals piled up for the Sphinx, The rulebook that would judge them was being drafted in the Valley of the Kings. The KV-62 saga didn't just embarrass a few experts. It taught Egypt how fast a technical nuance becomes a geopolitical headache. That memory hardened into policy. Here's the stakes. After 2015, Egypt had to protect three things at once: the physical fabric of Tutankhamun's tomb, the credibility of its antiquities authority, and the tourism economy that keeps lights on from Luxor to Cairo. One sloppy claim could chip a wall, tank a season, and hand cynics a talking point about secrecy. So the rules stopped being informal. They got teeth. Action started with data custody. After Watanabe's early announcements and the worldwide scramble for raw radar profiles, the ministry set a quiet standard. No more private datasets controlling the story. Any future scan inside royal tombs would involve Egyptian partners with mirrored access, centralized storage, and a publication plan agreed in advance. Teams could still argue, but they'd argue from the same numbers. That sounds mundane. It's not. It means the next hidden chamber headline can't ride a single laptop out of Luxor. Meanwhile, methodology moved from suggestion to mandate. The Turin survey's multi-frequency sweep became the baseline. Multiple antennae, dense grids, careful calibration on known features, and independent replication before grand claims. If your proposal didn't include redundancy, GPR plus a second method, or sequential campaigns by separate teams, it didn't reach the gate. The KV-62 contradiction, where one set read voids and the next read no voids, forced this. You couldn't chase a queen with a single instrument anymore. What nobody outside the room saw was the communications clause. After Eldamity's measured optimism got boiled down into secret rooms, and after the American team's inconclusive read got flattened into maybe, press became procedure. Draft releases were written alongside research plans. Language was preemptively dull. Anomaly, not chamber. Inconsistent returns, not materials. Unconfirmed, not likely. It frustrated storytellers. It calmed diplomats. Here's a micro-story. In a Luxor annex, a joint team rehearsed a press briefing for a small radar campaign near KV-62's entrance. The lead geophysicist kept reaching for corridor-like. An Egyptian co-director gently crossed it out. Linear anomaly trending north, he said again and again, until the phrasing stuck. Later, at the podium, the words sounded bloodless. They were designed that way. The impact on permits was immediate. Applications that once promised rapid assessments now had to timeline months of lab analysis and interlab review. Proposals that floated endoscopic drilling, if warranted by results, were kicked back unless they named exact drill diameters, target coordinates, and conservation contingencies, plus a threshold logic. What statistical confidence justifies a hole in plaster older than most countries? In KV-62, that answer became higher than hope. Translate that to the Sphinx, and the bar climbed another notch. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the background. The KV-62 affair became a training case. New ministry reviewers were handed the file and asked to mark every place interpretation snuck ahead of data. They circled organic/metallic signatures and wrote in the margin, GPR cannot discriminate materials here. They underlined void and added, or fracture, or repair. It wasn't punishment. It was muscle memory for the next request. And there was a next request. When TerraVision's surface survey flagged a corridor-like feature north of KV-62, the ministry didn't swing the door open or slam it shut. It asked for correlation with electrical methods, checks against known utility trenches, and a conservation plan that assumed the anomaly might be backfill. In old days, that might have been seen as stalling. Post KV-62, it was baseline caution. For the Sphinx, these rewrites matter. Any modern bid to scan for the Hall of Records must now thread the KV-62 needle. Shared datasets, multi-method redundancy, conservative language, and an explicit promise not to leap from blip to chamber. Add the Giza layer, higher fragility, heavier symbolism, and the path narrows to a footbridge. Here's the human cost. A young researcher with a brilliant inversion algorithm waits 6 months for a permit revision that swaps detect for assess. He sighs, signs, and keeps going. Across town, a conservator revisits a cracked map on the Sphinx's chest and sleeps better knowing no active seismic shots will buzz the stone this year. The KV-62 controversy didn't end curiosity. It disciplined it. It turned technique into policy and headlines into footnotes. And in that shift, the Sphinx's fate was decided for now. Not no, but not yet, on terms written in a painted room that refused to open. The tools Egypt will allow, and why. After KV62 rewrote the rulebook, the Sphinx inherited the fine print. The gate isn't closed, it's calibrated. The tools that get through share a theme: slow, non-destructive, and easy to explain without promising treasure. Muon imaging sits at the top of that list. It's passive. Detectors wait while cosmic particles drift. Through stone, where they pass more freely, you infer lower density. That's why it earned trust inside the Great Pyramid. No drilling, no buzzing, no contact. For the Sphinx, the geometry is harder, but the principle aligns with policy: patience over puncture. You can park detectors in the enclosure, build exposure over months, and argue about densities without touching the statue. The trade-off is resolution and ambiguity, and officials accept that. Ambiguity is safe. Next, high-resolution photogrammetry and LiDAR. They don't hunt voids, they hunt changes. Map the surface in micron detail, repeat the sweep next season, and watch what moves. For a monument that sheds grains like a sick patient, this is tree of. A LiDAR cube won't ignite a press frenzy about secret halls, but it catches bulges, cracks, and loss before they cascade. In the permit office, that's an easy yes. Thermal imaging sneaks in under the same logic. At dawn and dusk, stone breathes heat differently across repairs, voids, and fractures. A thermal camera paints a temperature field that hints at hidden boundaries. No contact, low risk, high monitoring value. Crucially, the language stays conservative. Thermal anomalies, not chambers. After KV62's radar whiplash, that phrasing matters. Electrical methods get a conditional maybe. Low energy resistivity with carefully planted electrodes, away from original stone, on modern paving, can map subsurface contrasts without mechanical vibration. The catch is salt. Everyone knows the Sphinx's limestone is laced with it, which smears signals. So permits require redundancy. Resistivity only if paired with independent datasets and anchored to known restoration trenches to calibrate interpretations. It's not a ban, it's a leash. Ground-penetrating radar hasn't been exiled. It's on probation. Officials saw how a single radargram became a global promise in KV62, so the terms changed. GPR campaigns must declare antenna frequencies, grid density, and controls in advance, tie returns to tested targets, and publish with Egyptian co-authors. Results must be framed as reflections and boundaries, not materials or rooms. If you say void, you're already outside the fence. Robotics gets a cautious green light, but only where there's precedent and containment. Inside shafts or service cavities that are already opened by prior work, a snake camera with no drilling is fine. Anything that adds a hole, however tiny, needs a conservation rationale beyond curiosity. The memory of the second blocking stone in the Queen's chamber is baked into this choice. One pencil hole was enough. Another would need overwhelming justification. Active seismic sources, the kind that thump or hammer, land on the no list. Vibration propagates through joints and repairs unpredictably. Even small sources can rattle salts and loosen edges. In a file drawer are crack maps that make the case better than any argument. If you want wave-based methods, you bring passive approaches, listening rather than striking, or you take your arrays to the periphery and accept lower resolution. Then there's the tool nobody sees, language. Every approved method comes with a communications clause. Teams agree to describe findings in risk-aware terms: anomaly, signal, heterogeneity, and to keep raw data under joint custody until analyses are vetted. It's not spin, it's damage control. A single dramatic adjective can summon a drilling rig in the public mind. Why these tools? Because the goal isn't to win an argument about a legend. It's to keep the Sphinx alive. After Gantenbrink's surprise door and KV62's radar surge, Egypt learned that technology can outrun conservation and narrative at the same time. So the kit allowed today does two jobs. It buys safety for the stone and time for the truth. If a real cavity exists, these methods will bracket it carefully. If not, they'll refine the map without scarring the patient. Either way, the giant sleeps under instruments designed to watch, not wound. Human stakes, careers, tourism, national story. Here's where the story stops being about instruments and starts being about people. A permit isn't just a stamp, it's a career on a thread. For a young geophysicist, one poorly phrased interview can brand you as reckless. For a curator in Cairo, one overhyped anomaly can bring a minister to your office asking why your site is in the news. For a tour guide on the plateau, one viral rumor can flood the gates or empty them. Stakes run through paychecks. Tourism is oxygen. When headlines say secret chamber, flights get booked. When the follow-up says inconclusive, those bookings wobble. A week of cancellations means drivers lose tips, vendors lose rent, and a hotel manager calls the antiquities office asking what's going on. The Sphinx isn't just limestone, it's a payroll. Meanwhile, careers hinge on tone as much as truth. Say void, too soon, and you're the person who cried treasure. Say anomaly, too softly, and your grant dries up because a donor wanted drama. Scientists learn to calibrate language like they calibrate instruments. They practice replacing corridor with linear zone. It keeps doors open. It also hollows the story they once thought they were writing. What nobody outside the loop sees is the personal calculus. A conservation engineer steps into the enclosure at dawn, checks a hairline crack she marked last season, and thinks about her father's pension. If a bad skin leads to pressure for drilling, and drilling leads to damage, she's the one standing in front of cameras explaining a missing flake of history. That's not abstract. She's patched stone that crumbled at a touch. Every ask for one small hole lands on her desk like a dare. Across town, a historian sits at a desk stacked with tour itineraries from 20 countries. He knows a blockbuster revelation would surge visitors, pay for restoration seasons, fund scholarships, and electrify museums worldwide. He also knows the cost of a misfire. After the KV-62 radar roller coaster, he watched parents cancel trips because Egypt changed the story again. Trust is currency. Once you spend it, it's hard to earn back. Here's a human moment. A local guide named Karim wipes dust from his sunglasses and waits near the Sphinx viewing platform. A German couple asks about the Hall of Records. He smiles, walks the line he's learned to walk. Many stories, he says, and many studies. The Sphinx keeps her secrets. He keeps it respectful. He keeps them curious. If he leans into legend, the police might warn him. If he crushes it, the tip shrinks. He threads the space between myth and policy, because that's where his week's groceries live. Officials carry a different weight. Zahi Hawass has built a public identity on announcements and authority. When he dismisses an unpermitted claim as fake, he's protecting a site and a brand, the national brand. Egypt's story is not just ancient, it's present, a statement about stewardship in a world that once looted its tombs. Saying no becomes a statement of adulthood. Saying yes too fast risks looking naive again. Meanwhile, international scholars juggle passports and patience. A French physicist working on muon detectors knows that a careful null result is still a result, valuable, incremental. But her department chair wants headlines. Her funder wants engagement. She writes a report that says no significant density heterogeneities detected at this scale. She expects a shrug. Instead, a tabloid rewrites it as no halls under Sphinx. Colleagues roll their eyes. On her next application, she adds a paragraph about public outreach, because that's part of the job now. Then there are the quiet reputational debts. Nicholas Reeves leaned into a theory that could have made him. The negative scans didn't unmake him, but they changed the room when he walks in. Some listen harder, some listen less. Mamdouh al-Damati stood in front of cameras and bet on radar. Later, other data boxed him in. He still believes a hallway might exist near KV-62, and maybe he's right, but he learned how quickly support melts when methods disagree. That lesson hangs over every Sphinx proposal. Egypt's national story sits at the center. The Sphinx is an emblem on passports, posters, and classrooms. It has to stand for continuity, not chaos. A hall of records, anchored to a psychic reading, cuts the narrative at the knees. A careful study that reveals nothing new doesn't sing, but it says something else. We are custodians, not gamblers. Inside the ministry, that line gets repeated like a prayer. Here's where it gets personal for the audience. A discovery under the Sphinx would belong to the world's imagination. The risk of finding nothing, and having drilled anyway, belongs to Egypt's stone. That asymmetry shapes policy more than any legend. It's not a cover-up, it's an accounting. So the stakes are human. Scholars guarding their credibility, workers guarding their wages, officials guarding a symbol, and a nation guarding its voice. The Sphinx sits between curiosity and responsibility, and the people around it carry both. What we can say about anomalies under the Sphinx. Let's pin down what's real, what's plausible, and what's just noise when people say there are anomalies beneath the Sphinx. An anomaly isn't a chamber. It's a difference, density, moisture, conductivity, reflection. that shows up when instruments probe the ground. On the Giza Plateau, differences are everywhere. Joints in the limestone, ancient quarry cuts, restoration trenches, salt-wet zones, dry pockets, and backfill from earlier conservation. If you don't anchor your readings to known features, the map starts telling stories the rock didn't write. Start with the geology. The Sphinx and its enclosure are carved from layered limestone with variable quality. Some beds are strong, others crumble. Natural fractures run through the rock, and those planes attract runoff when storms hit and salts when groundwater rises. Over more than a century, restorers cut trenches, laid blocks, injected mortars. Every one of those actions left contrasts that modern instruments detect. So when a survey shows a linear low-density zone near the forepaws, that line might be a fracture, a trench, damp sand, or yes, a void. Without ground truth, core, endoscope, exposed edge, you can't name it. Now talk methods, but in plain language. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses that bounce at boundaries. In tidy geology, the returns are crisp. Beneath the Sphinx, reflections stack, scatter, and curve along joints. A bright reflector can be a change from rock to air, or rock to wet, or rock to old mortar. We know this trap from Tutankhamun's tomb. Early GPR profiles were read as voids. Later multi-frequency passes didn't corroborate chambers. Same principle applies at Giza with more noise. Electrical resistivity pushes current through the ground and measures how easily it flows. Dry limestone resists, wet paths conduct. The Sphinx's salt-laced stone complicates this. Moisture drawn up by capillary action creates conductive streaks, smearing the image. A low resistivity patch might be a cavity, or it might be salty dampness. That ambiguity doesn't make resistivity useless. It means you need corroboration and careful modeling tied to restoration records. Seismic techniques listen for how waves move through the subsurface. In principle, voids slow and scatter waves. In practice, the Sphinx's fracture network and patched body create multiple paths that mimic cavity signatures. Add the conservation cap. Officials won't allow active thumping near fragile zones. Passive listening from the periphery can help, but resolution drops. So a vague seismic soft spot under the enclosure doesn't outrun the alternatives. Fissure, cut, backfill. Muon imaging earns trust because it's passive. But detectors need strategic placement and time, and the Sphinx's geometry isn't a clean block like the Great Pyramid. At shallow depths in varied rock, Muon results blur. If Muon someday show a broad low-density region beneath the enclosure floor, the statement will be careful, a density heterogeneity, not a room. So what can we say responsibly? First, surveys over the years have produced localized contrasts beneath and around the Sphinx enclosure. Some align with documented restorations. Good, that's calibration. Others don't match the known map. Those unknowns are true anomalies. They merit study, not headlines. Second, any single method claim about a chamber under the Sphinx fails the post-KV62 standard. To rise above speculation, an anomaly needs multi-method support that converges on the same shape, depth, and boundaries, plus a plausible geological explanation ruled out. Even then, the word is candidate, not chamber. Third, scale matters. Claims about vast rooms or corridors long enough to rewrite history aren't reflected in credible, published datasets. If non-invasive tools ever resolve a feature, it's more likely to be small, pockets, cuts, or localized voids, because large voids are easier to verify and would have been correlated by redundant methods by now. Fourth, context shapes interpretation. The water erosion debate doesn't prove or disprove subsurface cavities. Weathering patterns at the surface tell a complex story of rainfall episodes, runoff, salt cycling, and human intervention. That complexity increases the number of non-architectural causes for subsurface contrasts. Finally, policy sets the ceiling on certainty. Without invasive verification, anomalies remain possibilities. After the radar roller coaster in KV62 and the carefully paced revelations inside the Great Pyramid's shafts, Egypt will not escalate an anomaly to excavation without overwhelming, replicated evidence and a conservation plan that eliminates avoidable risk. So yes, there are anomalies beneath and around the Sphinx enclosure. Some are mapped, some are unexplained. None on the public record meet the threshold to declare a hidden chamber. The honest statement is narrow and clear. The subsurface is heterogeneous. Certain localized contrasts persist across limited surveys. Further non-invasive correlation could refine the picture. Invasive proof is not currently justified. In a place where legend outruns method, that restraint is the most we can responsibly say. The decision point, if data turns positive. While the rumor waited, the instruments kept inching forward. Now picture the scene that policymakers quietly dread. A new multi-method campaign at the Sphinx enclosure. Muon detectors idling for months, low-energy resistivity tied to restoration maps, cautious GPR transects with declared frequencies and grid density. The teams come back with converging signals. A compact, roughly rectangular low-density zone under modern paving between the forepaws, 2 to 3 meters below the surface, dimensions small, maybe 3 by 2 meters, but persistent across methods. Not a corridor, not a vast hall. Still, a shape that refuses to go away. Stakes spike immediately. A positive convergence doesn't prove a chamber, but it moves the needle from rumor to candidate feature. For Egypt's guardians, this is the hardest moment. Say nothing, and speculation blooms. Say too much, and pressure for drilling ignites. The calculus shifts from whether something exists to how to decide without breaking the patient. Action begins in a closed meeting in Cairo. Scientists, conservators, legal counsel, and a ministerial aide with a thick folder of press protocols. The geophysicists present overlays, muon excess centered here, resistivity low here, edges sharp, radar reflectors tracking a boundary along 2 sides. They lead with caveats. Salts can mimic, fractures can cluster. The conservators respond with crack maps and salt migration diagrams. They underline vibration-sensitive zones. The legal counsel reads the communications clause like scripture. The aide asks one question. What is the minimum step to reduce uncertainty without touching original stone? Meanwhile, something else is happening off-site. Embargoed whispers reach a newsroom. A producer drafts the graphic anyway, glowing rectangle under the paws. The team knows the timeline just got shorter. If they don't own the story will own them. This is the pivot to procedure. Officials lay out a decision tree carved from KV-62's scars. Step 1. Independent replication by a second team using the same methods, blind to the first team's raw datasets, supervised by an Egyptian co-director. Step 2. Add a complementary technique, thermal at dawn and dusk across the same footprint, to test for edge effects that might indicate a void boundary versus a damp lens. Step 3. Archival dive to cross-check against early 20th century trenching and backfill logs. An unknown that matches an old trench becomes a known. Only if convergence survives those filters does Step 4 trigger. A micro-invasive verification plan that never contacts original limestone. Here's where the engineering gets precise. The conservators suggest a single microbore, sub-centimeter, drilled vertically through modern paving stones previously installed over disturbed fill, with a protective sleeve isolating the bore from surrounding material. The path avoids original bedrock entirely. At the bore's base, a fiber optic camera inspects the void candidate. No coring, no fluid injection, no vibration. If the camera sees backfill or a fracture void, the bore is capped, grouted within the modern layer, and mapped for future reference. If it sees masonry, cut surfaces, tool marks, then and only then does the plan escalate to a minimally invasive endoscopic survey under a fresh permit revision. Impact radiates across 3 fronts. Scientifically, the microbore provides ground truth that moves interpretation out of ambiguity. Politically, the method signals stewardship. Egypt authorizes a needle, not a knife, on its terms. Publicly, the language stays disciplined. The press release avoids chamber, uses localized density anomaly, and spells out the safeguards. A Q&A explains why non-invasive methods can converge on a false positive and why the microbore stays inside modern layers. A timeline commits to publish raw anonymized datasets after peer review with Egyptian co-authors. Here's a micro-story. The night before the board vote, a conservator walks the enclosure with a headlamp. She stops where the proposed bore would go, kneels, and touches the edge of a modern paver warmed by the day. She thinks about the Getty salt studies, about hairline failures after storms, about how easy it is to break old stone, and how hard to repair it honestly. She stands, nods to herself, and writes one line in the morning memo. Acceptable risk if sleeve isolation is strictly enforced. But there's one problem that policy has to anticipate: success. If the camera peers into a cut space, the discovery won't be quiet. The procedure accounts for that too. No widening, no unsealing, no removal, only imaging and environmental sampling if safe, air chemistry, humidity, then recap and step back. A conservation impact panel meets within 48 hours to draft whether any further action is even conceivable without jeopardizing the statue. In the aftermath, two outcomes live side by side. If the anomaly is geological or backfill, the ministry can say with data that a persistent signal wasn't a chamber. The rumor loses oxygen. If it's masonry, the narrative tightens. Not a hall of records, not a vault of scrolls, but a human-made cavity of unknown purpose, documented without harm. The next decision becomes slower, heavier, and shared. International advisory input, public reporting, and a second, deeper plan that still refuses to gamble with the Sphinx. That's the decision point. Not yes or no to legend, but how to choose the smallest, safest next step when the data stop being noisy and start being real. The legacy of the scanning wars. In the end, the scanners didn't just map stone, they reshaped behavior. Giza learned to speak in the grammar of anomalies and thresholds, to translate curiosity into protocols. The legacy isn't a chamber revealed or disproved. It's a set of reflexes, how Egypt responds when instruments whisper more than they shout. Start with trust. Before KV62, a promising image could slip from a laptop to a headline in a day. After, raw data became shared property, co-authored, mirrored, archived. That shift didn't kill discovery. It slowed the tempo and thickened peer review. The idea was simple. If Egypt is going to own the risk, it should also own the narrative spine. The sober one, the one that survives. Then there's language. Engineers and Egyptologists learned to sand the edges off their words. Corridor-like became linear anomaly. Void became low-density region. That sounds dull because it is. But dull kept the Sphinx out of emergency debates and kept cracked maps from becoming political documents. The scanning wars taught a truism that conservationists always knew. Every adjective is a chisel. Meanwhile, methods evolved under constraint. Muons earned their place, not because they solve everything, but because they harm nothing. GPR stayed in the kit with caveats. Resistivity got paired, never solo. Seismic learned to listen, not pound. Robotics shifted from conquering unknowns to documenting edges. Each tool adapted to a patient-first clinic, not a frontier lab. If you want to test bravado, pick another monument. What nobody celebrates is the patient's tax. Null results, carefully won, don't fund themselves. Teams spent seasons building exposures, only to report heterogeneity and move on. But those maps, overlays of fractures, repairs, densities, fed conservation with hard boundaries. They told restorers where salts gather, where injections fail, where a season's rain might bite next. The scanning wars left behind a quiet treasure, a better medical chart. Culturally, the wars forced a reckoning with myth. The Hall of Records migrated from a grail to a test of discipline. Could a nation refuse its own blockbuster? It did, repeatedly, not out of contempt for questions, but out of respect for a fragile inheritance. That choice created a new kind of pride, less about spectacle, more about stewardship, broadcast in the careful cadence of press briefings that say less than they know and more than they feel. There were personal legacies too. Researchers adjusted ambitions without abandoning rigor. The best learned to thread policy, to design campaigns that could survive both peer review and a minister's calendar. Some burned out, frustrated by throttles and timelines that stretched past grants. Others found a strange freedom in constraints, clarity about what they could promise and what they'd never force from stone. For Egypt's guardians, the wars clarified a doctrine: transparency with breaks. Publish methods, share data, narrate uncertainty, and never escalate on a single line of evidence. That doctrine now travels. New projects in Saqqara and Dashur arrive pre-tempered, communications plans attached, redundancy baked in. The memory of copper pins and a painted wall became institutional muscle. Here's a final micro-story. In a lecture hall in Cairo, a class of conservators watches two slides: Gantenbrink's polished door with copper fittings, then a KV62 radargram annotated with cautious notes. The instructor asks what both images have in common. A student raises a hand. They're both invitations. The instructor nods. And our job? The room answers in chorus. Decide if answering is safe. The scanning wars left their marks in quiet places: permit clauses, training modules, glossaries. They also left a steadier pulse at Giza. When the rumor flares, the Sphinx doesn't flinch. She's been scanned, mapped, argued over, and protected by people who learned that sometimes the most radical act in archaeology is to wait. The Sphinx endures because people chose patience over spectacle when it mattered. If you want more of these hard, human stories behind famous stones, subscribe and watch the next film on the Great Pyramid's hidden voids. How muons found absence and forced a new kind of truth-telling. Join us and help keep real discovery slow, careful, and alive.